Hey, thanks, Naveed. Hey,
Hi,
everyone.
everybody.
Hey, everyone.
Good to see you all. Awesome. This is exciting. I actually just listened to the last panel, which was founders talking about their own mental fitness, which I've lived for many years myself, and it was great to hear them being very transparent and open and honest about their struggles to maintain mental fitness. I can tell you, I've certainly been a victim of that myself in the past. So it was great to hear the conversation. I would love it if we could kind of maintain that transparent and open conversation today from our perspective. I think that would be really powerful. But before we jump in, I think we need to do some quick intros. So for good morning, good afternoon for everybody that's watching. My name is David Mandell. I am currently a co-founder and investor at Massive. We're a venture firm based out of Boulder, Colorado. But relevant for this conversation, I think prior to that, I was actually a founder for over 20 years. I've started and sold 3 different companies myself. I've been an angel investor forever, and I've also been a CEO coach for about 10 years. So kind of good perspective from every seat at the table. And I'm pretty damn old, but it's not obvious. So I probably experienced almost all of the challenges and frustrations that both founders and investors have gone through as well. So I'm super excited to talk about this today. I'm going to spend a few minutes letting the panelists introduce themselves, and then we can hopefully go real deep. So Ayanna, do you want to kick off with the intros?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here. So my name is Ayanna Kerrison. I'm an investor at Precursor Ventures. We're based in San Francisco. We are a early stage venture capital fund, generalist in that we invest in just about every sector with the exception being deep tech. And so we mainly focus on backing pre-seed and seed stage companies that are building software and hardware solutions. That's me.
Awesome. Thank you, Ayanna. Saba, you wanna jump in?
Awesome, thanks. Hey, everyone. Saba Karim, head of pipeline at Techstars and also fund manager for Rising Stars, a small pre-accelerator fund investing in underrepresented founders. Prior to this, I went through Techstars Boston with the dating CRM that went on to be acquired by HubSpot. And so I love sharing knowledge and teaching founders things to do and things to not do as well.
Yeah, and Saba's real good about sharing that stuff on Twitter too. So hop on his feed and interact because he always has good answers. Danish, you want to jump in?
Hi, everybody. This is Danish coming from New York. I am a founding partner at GreyMatter Capital. We are a venture firm that invests exclusively in mental, behavioral, and brain health. We believe there's a huge opportunity to transform these industries. They've been very, very held back, and the time is now to change them. I'm also a venture partner at Watershed Ventures. And at Watershed, we invest in mission-driven founders looking to transform healthy living, productivity, and purpose and sustainable systems. Prior to being an investor, I was a founder myself, built one of the first mental health telemedicine companies to scale, acquired by Optum, spent 2 years there. And I live in New York City and always excited to see new founders.
Awesome. And Christina, you want to wrap it up for us?
Sure. I'm Christina Wallace. I am currently on the faculty at Harvard Business School, where I run our HBS Startup Bootcamp. I'm also a course head for our first year entrepreneurship course for all of our MBAs. I am an angel investor and active as a founder prior to joining the faculty. Was a founder for about a dozen years in the New York tech community, and wrote one piece many years ago on founder mental health that went a little bit viral on Medium, which probably what got me on everyone's radar for this conversation. But delighted to be part of this conversation. Certainly, I see it from the student perspective and the rising entrepreneurs, as well as experiencing it myself as a founder and as an advisor and investor.
Cool. I'm glad you guys are all here, and I hope we haven't lost Ayanna. Hopefully she can jump back in. I'm not sure if she's having video trouble or not, but hopefully she can jump back in. So cool. Why don't we start with an easy one? Title of this panel is Investor Perspective on Founder Mental Health. So let's start with, what is your perspective? How do you think about founder mental health, if you even do? I think I know the answer there to a lot of people, but why don't we start with a general perspective on how you guys as investors think about founder mental health, what role that plays, and your general thoughts. And Danish, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, happy to do that. Having been on both sides, I'm keenly aware of how hard it is as a founder, and given how many demands there are on your time, how easy it is to sort of let go of some things personally, including your mental health and your fitness, right, which can play into your mental health. When your investors, your teams, your customers are all needing you around the clock. The first thing that goes can be sometimes yourself, and that's sort of is one of those things that feels like okay to do in the short run and can really hurt you in the long run. What I look for today is founders that are on that journey of self-awareness, of recognizing what it is that works for their mental health, and that is different things for different people. I have a founder who I love talking to her. She's building a pediatric mental health company, and every time we catch up, and we catch up frequently, every single time, you start a phone call, you call a friend, you ask them like, hey, how are you doing? And usually you get like a very generic sort of like just, process answer, right? Like, I'm fine. And you move on to what you were talking about. What I love about her is every single time I ask her that question, she actually takes a moment, reflects on like how she's doing, right? And that components of that are her family, her work, her relationship, and she's always gives me a really authentic answer, and it tells me that she's like really centered and is aware of where she is. And she may not always be able to get all things right, but she's always just aware of where she is and what she needs to do to kind of bring her own mental health back to where she wants it to be. So that's something that we've just started noticing a lot more and becoming a lot more aware of, and encouraging our founders to be aware of.
Awesome. I have a lot of follow-up questions there, but let's just move on. And by the way, I encourage you guys to just jump in. Don't need to wait for me to point out. But so, who wants to jump in next on their perspective of founder mental health?
I mean, I think it's interesting. So many of us in this conversation were founders first, right? That we have come to this point in our lives where we are making investments, but we care about this topic, having experienced just how hard it is on the founder side. And I think one of the things that I'm commonly talking about with the teams that I'm advising or investing in is just a very explicit conversation with what support do you have in place, and what systems, what habits, what practices can you build in from the beginning to really support mental health, rest, recuperation. What is that process you have? Because I think Danish is right that it's the easiest thing to let go when it feels like you have all of these things that are due right now or yesterday, and you have to keep going. And I like to point to a data point from the world of operations management that we teach here at HBS around sort of the highest performing world-class operations lines operate at 85% capacity. They have planned downtime in order to fix machinery, in order to have space for when they need to have surges, in order to be able to redo things that might have mistakes in them. They plan for space because they recognize that running at 100% is just not feasible. And if you don't have planned downtime, you're going to have unplanned downtime. And often that's more expensive than the planned downtime. So I really encourage founders to really be thoughtful about what's that 85% threshold that I can really aim for on a regular basis so that I have that space for the surges and for the rest.
Great. I think that's a really good point. I mean, we could go deep on hustle culture and the lack of work-life balance on that question alone, but let's jump in just to kind of finish our general thoughts. Ayanna, Saba, if you guys want to jump in. Yeah.
I haven't had the good fortune of being a founder yet, but given where we invest, the one thing that Precursor investors do have the good fortune of is engaging with a lot of first-time founders, a lot of solo founders. And these are really individuals that use and see entrepreneurship as a stepping stone to build generational wealth. Or engaging with individuals that are living life at a variety of different intersections, whether that's gender, ethnicity, or sexual orientation, right? And so the one thing that I have been fortunate enough to do is being in the people business is lead with EQ, because whether I'm assessing a company at the early point of my engagement for pre-investment consideration, or whether they bring them on to be a part of our portfolio, I have to be super cognizant of what I say and how I'm communicating and assessing them and giving them feedback on their founder journey, how it can either be triggering to their mental health journey or supportive. And so as an early stage investor, and I think everyone on the team really does a great job of being a support system and being really cautious of words and the impact it can have.
Awesome. Super interesting. Oh God, I just want to go deep on every single one of these comments, but we only have an hour. So Saba, do you want to provide any thoughts on the first question, then we can move on?
At the highest level, I think, everyone's still figuring it out. Like, over the last couple of years, I feel like mental health has been even bigger than and more, not popular, but more prominent than ever. But even as investors or individuals, we're still trying to figure out what it means and how to solve for it. And so, I'm here to learn too from the others about what they're doing. And even the founders in the chat, like, feel free to put in the things that you all do. Like, there isn't an answer to it, but the important thing is that we're all talking about it, I think. So
totally great. Yep. Yeah. It's as long as the conversation keeps going, that's really what matters. So I completely agree. So I've got a bunch of listed questions, but I just got to go deep on the stuff you guys are saying, because that's much more interesting to me. And Danish and Ayanna, you guys brought us some really interesting kind of crossover points. As you mentioned, you have one founder you work with who's very transparent with you when she speaks with you, and that's super powerful and helps you make decisions. And that I have found historically, that's really a result of a safe space, right? And if that founder did not feel safe with you, there's no way she would have been transparent in her answer to you. So that says a lot for you, so kudos. And Ayanna, I know, having worked with a lot of founders, look, I'm a privileged white male, I've been doing this for a long time. I know there are tons and tons of challenges that I have not faced that people that don't look like me face every day. And this concept of always having to look like you're killing it, or always being perfect, or always having, everything going the right way.
Yeah.
How do you create a safe space for founders that are scared, and rightfully so, right? Not their fault. They've been conditioned by an industry to be scared. So how do you create a safe space for founders to either talk to you about mental health, or to really understand who they are and how you can help both them personally as well as their businesses? So I'll just throw that out there, and whoever wants to jump in.
Yeah, it's a solid question. And honestly, I think it takes the engagement of both the investor and founder. Like, we talk a lot about like founder market fit, but investor founder fit is so important, because at the middle of it is trust, right? The founder has to feel like they can trust their investor beyond just being a capital partner to help them through the highs and the lows of their mental health journey. And a big part of creating that safe space is spending time to understand each other's shared value systems, spending time to understand, honestly, like the true backstory, what's behind you building this solution, like what's driving you, what causes you to wake up every day to tackle this. And even in those conversations, what happens is there are vulnerable moments that come to the surface. And I think that's important. And like working through this founder investor fit is also the conversation around understanding when you need to be vulnerable with your investor. Do not, as a founder, have in your mind that at any given time, the investor's going to question, the investor's confidence in you is going to come into question, essentially. And like that's a big piece, I think, of this really unique relationship that founders investors have. So if the investor can spend more time, whether that's at the top of the process or through your relationship, creating time to find a balance between talking about the business and where you can be a support system there, but also talking about the person that's building the business, because we are in the people business, right? And so we got to make sure that the people that we're backing are in a space to make healthy decisions for their business. And the only way we can do that is if we carve out time to get to know each other. And in knowing each other, those vulnerable moments will come to pass. And in those vulnerable moments that come to pass, we'll figure out a way together how to support each other towards those highs and lows.
It's so important, because being able to create that space requires, I think, you as an investor to also be vulnerable.
Absolutely.
Right? And there are opportunities certainly where you can share your own war stories and those moments. in the past, but I think there's also opportunities to share what you're struggling with right now, right? Like I'm going through a lot right now. I've got a couple of young kids. They're really sick. I feel overwhelmed. Like I'm having a day or a week or a month. And so I think there's just an opportunity to be real on both sides where you can model for them the vulnerability, the vocabulary, the opportunity to have this as a regular part of the business check-in. I think there's so many great examples. I have two young children. They're 3 and 7 months, and I've learned so much about parenting young children from like TikTok and Instagram. I wish I were making this up, but it's true. There are all of these videos of like parents, parent experts modeling how you can have a conversation with your toddler to help them develop the awareness, the vocabulary, the practice of naming those feelings. And I'm not trying to compare founders to toddlers, but I do think there's this is a skill, a muscle, right, that you have to develop. And if you have a decent amount of self-awareness, that this is part of how you have learned to talk about what's going on in your life, it might be easier to share that with your investors. But if this isn't part of how you have been given permission to exist, right? And the relationships and the conversations that you have on a regular basis, it can be harder. I actually find that the male founders that I back, I have to really pull this out of them sometimes, where the female founders have the vocabulary, or maybe it's the relationship with me that they feel a little bit safer in. I don't know, but there's definitely I think a practice to this that not everyone has.
Yeah, well, I'm going to jump in there. I think that's a really, really great sort of aspirational vision for what a healthy founder investor dynamic could look like and should look like, right? And what we're all sort of trying to slowly work towards. Vulnerability on both sides, trust on both sides, lots of time invested up front to get to that place. I want to maybe shift the conversation to the less ideal scenarios, which, by the way, in my experience, there are actually more of than not, right?
Yep.
I feel like if any founder has investors who are in this room or in this call today, I think they'll be fine. I think things will work out. They'll be a safe space. The question, the more interesting question to me is like, what do you do when you don't have that? And like, what do you there's so many board dynamics and investor dynamics. And by the way, on the investor side too, there's a lot of pressure, right? There's a lot of pressure from your LPs. There's a lot of pressure from your partners, from your investment committees. And so given that these are really high pressure situations, and given that, if even one person is showing up into a board dynamic with, and they're bringing their stress or their suffering, right? Like, as we say in mental health, suffering is contagious. If they're bringing their suffering to that situation and there's a power dynamic attached to that, kind of what do you do then, right? Like how should founders preserve their mental health in those types of settings? And I'd love to hear folks' thoughts on that.
So I was going to jump in. Yeah, Saba. I know you've published a bunch of stuff on this, so I'd love to hear your thoughts.
No, I'm just going to rewind a little bit from Danish's because I had some good thoughts to reflect on it, but feel free to someone to pull a Danish thread. I think it's more of the investor's job than some may admit. Like, is it in the curriculum? Is it in the resources and the wikis and the libraries to talk about and offer resources for mental health? Our founders not penalized for sharing their journeys, right? Maybe even more important, the way I think about it, at least because I just see so many companies, like, what about the founders who don't have any investors yet? Like, are they being judged on going through a lot right now? Are they less investable? And so I don't know. Like, I don't know if investors are trained enough or okay with it yet to be like able to help qualify and give the solutions there. Something I'm thinking of while my co-speakers were talking was just like, look, like, what if your investor update just had what we used to do at Techstars, a happy and crappy, and just answer the question of how are you doing, right? Professionally and personally, and just making it okay and making it normal and vulnerable and being able to share that. I think that's super important. So at the highest level, all I can say is I think at first founders need to trust and see examples of us as investors sharing stories of how someone shared something and it was okay. and not being penalized for it. I think that's really, really, really important.
I think that's super important. I just want to say a couple of things there. So, often we talk about investors need to, we need to acknowledge that you can't address the group as a whole, right? Like there's spectrums just like founders, right? And some investors will never get it, will never care. It's not their job, and they'll just never be there. And the trick is to find investors that do, right? And so that's whenever I talk to people that are fundraising, I always try to explain that it's not just about the money, it's about the partner, right? And who you're going to be partnering with to build your business. And that's really what matters. And I've seen incredibly bad behavior at the cap table, at the board level, at the investor level from founders, even more so recently with the way the market is going, right? There's a lot of investors that are under real pressure whose returns are looking a lot shitter than they were about 6 months ago, and they're stressing. But Ayanna, both you and Saba brought up the term trust, and I think that's one of the keys. And just as a founder and investor, and having seen all sides of the table, one of the issues that I think is super important that I'd love to go a little deeper on, and Danish, I haven't forgotten your question too, because I think it plays into that, is how do you create trust? And one of the real problems that I've seen in the past is that most founders don't actually understand what an investor's business is. And they don't understand that their motivations over the life cycle of that business may not be completely aligned, right? And they trust their investors, and they just do what the investors say, or they listen, and they think their investors are their bosses. And they haven't done the work to realize, like, your investor may be a good person, they may not, but their goals may not always align with yours as the business evolves. So, Saba, you mentioned wikis and curriculum, but not every investor has wikis and curriculum, right? So, maybe you guys have some thoughts on like what you do to help with the education process, so you can create a system of trust. Because I know, as an early founder in my career, like, I assumed they just always knew what to do, and I had to just do what they said.
Yeah.
And I realized too late that was wrong. Right. And understanding is the key. So do you guys talk about your specific motivations versus creating a safe space for other conversations?
Yeah, I think, Saba's actually hitting on a very solid point. And the point to me, kind of the underlying word is communication. And so, at any point in time, either the founder or investor kind of has the leg up on information. But once you've kind of moved past that relationship, moved into the relationship where a part of the portfolio, I think it's important that founders let us in and let us know what you need. And so whether that's in the business update formally, and that's either the crappy, not crappy, or the other updates, or that's in communication when you're having your periodic check-in to let the investor in and knowing what is working, what isn't working, those are the moments where you create trust. Because think about it, I think, when you're in a space where there is a dearth of information, it's really hard for us to be your advocates. And our goal at the end of the day is support you in building an extremely successful company. In order for us to do that, we have to know where you stand. And I think the more, and even now, so it being in this, downturn, if you want to call it that, pre-recession, if you want to call it that, that is the time where you should be able to lean on your investors who have, if they've been around long enough, they have worked through recessions.
And in the middle of a great conversation, we've lost. Yeah, so that's horrible. Hopefully she'll jump back in. But Danish, so you were talking before around how do you help them when they're in a bad situation or a tough situation, right? And I was mentioning before, and Saba were talking about, hey, on the investor updates, founders should do this and founders should do this. And I kind of feel like we always throw it at the founder, right? And I think we forget that it's not just their job, right? It's our job too. And as you had mentioned before, like what you do in a board meeting or other situations when they are dealing with a difficult topic, and how do you create a safe space or a way for them to navigate that? So as investors, what do you do? And I'll just kind of start this, and then you can take it off. So I know that when I invest in a company, first of all, even before we invest, I do a lot of work to find out, is this a founder that I feel like I can really talk to? Like, is there transparency there? Is there understanding? I'm not just investing in a company, I'm investing in an individual. But it often takes a lot of time on my part after the investment to make sure they feel safe. Right. And one of the things that we do at Massive specifically is we always explain to them, understand this is exactly how we work. This is why we invested. This is how we expect the investment to go. We know it doesn't always go that way, but these are our motivations.
Yeah.
Right. And whenever we have a conversation, please understand that our job is to actually give you two perspectives, if there are those. Right. One, our business perspective. And two, if we could take ourselves out of our business perspective, thoughts on how you should think things through. And we're always very specific about those conversations. Right. And that's something that took us a while to get to. Right. So instead of just throwing it back on the founders, what are some things that you guys have seen or put in place to help founders actually understand they can work through some of the mental challenges?
I mean, that's a great starting point, and I think, look, that's a list that we can all add to. The reason I was going where I was going is because my instinct is that there are more founders here than there are investors, and so when I definitely, if I was hanging out with my investor friends, I'd be preaching them the things that we could be doing. What I think is more helpful for listeners today is really dealing not just with those difficult situations, but the normal situation, that the median situation, which is a situation that is sometimes adversarial, right? Like, but definitionally, there is one of accountability and a relationship of where someone is the boss, right? Maybe not in the early days and maybe not at the seed stage, but by the time you're at the C, the D, the founders have been diluted down to less than 50%. The board has voting control. At that point, the board is your boss. The board can replace a founder. And so I think what is valuable for founders to hear is strategies and tactics on how to preserve their mental health and how to show up in a way where they can handle these complex situations. Because if we tell them that, hey, here's what good investors look like or should look like, we're doing them a bit of a disservice. Because, not every founder has the privilege of being able to choose their investors all the time, right? Sometimes you just need the capital and you have to get going. And what's available, especially to an emerging founder, what's available to them is not going to be that branded firm that has the luxury to invest in all the resources that you need and the playbooks that you need and the investor subsidized therapy or coach. Those things are great. And when those are happening, the no amount of advice I can give is going to actually help them. But I think what I have seen really successful founders do in navigating complex situations, difficult situations where your mental health will get challenged. I have found that founders that are really, really taking the time to invest in themselves and to show up with good mental health are able to be more in control of the situation, even when the odds are stacked against them, right? Recently saw a board dynamic where, the board sprung a replacement, CEO replacement on the founder, right? The founder had built the company, had been in it for years, and the board decided that, hey, they wanted a different CEO. And they sprung this on this. And the founder had, I could have, if I was in their shoes, my normal reaction would have been very reactive. I would have been probably very upset. My mental health would have been very, very impacted. This founder displayed a level of maturity that was just unparalleled. Their first response was, and the part of the board that was bringing this proposal expected the founder to get upset, and so they were sort of on the defensive already going into it. But this founder, they were able to sort of disarm everybody by putting the company's interests first and sort of aligning everyone around saying, hey, here's what we're all working towards first. And that disarmed the situation completely and was able to allow everyone to, instead of sitting on opposite sides of the table, come around the same side, right? And they were only able to do that because they were in a place where they had invested in their own mental health. And I know from what this founder does in their own time that they had invested in their mental health to be at a place where they could have that kind of reaction. That was a very not a median reaction, right? So that is, that's where I would love to sort of think about more is how do we equip founders to handle these situations, because we won't be able to.
Perfect.
Five of us cannot solve all investors and we cannot fix all investors. Founders will for many
Not
years.
yet, we can't. Not yet, we can't. We're trying though. But so let me throw that back at you. So what are some specific things that you've seen founders do? Because I know I've got a few ideas too, to get them in a better place to be able to deal with a tough dynamic and operate as professionals in a very emotionally driven situation.
Yeah, and I don't want to hog the mic here. I want to pass it back to others, but I'll throw maybe one or two just to get started. One tendency that, a lot of your mental health is about becoming aware of your tendencies and learning how to recognize them and then how to manage them, right? And so one tendency that a lot of founders have is to occupy their life with their work, and then whatever is left, right, or when they can no longer keep going, fill it with other things, right? And that can be your physical health, your relationships, your social life. And what I would sort of encourage founders to do is to become aware of that tendency and think about what is your MVP, your sustainable level of like health on your physical health, on your relationships, on your other aspects of your life, and protect that, and then let the work fill everything else. Because we can talk about work-life balance all day we want, but founders will let that boundary blur very easily, right? So guarding and protecting those things first, instead of saying, hey, I'm only going to work X hours, which never works in practice. It's great in theory, but you always spill over. But starting by protecting those things, holding those as sacred, and I should practice this more than I'm preaching. I struggle with this myself. But that's sort of one way to start, is once your bucket is not empty in any of these areas, you're going to be able to be much more show up in a way that is balanced.
Yep, I totally agree. And I'm going to hog the mic for a second, just because I'm very passionate about this point as well. And I actually gave a whole talk around, the emotional triggers of CEOs, right? And one of the biggest trigger that I had growing up was this whole concept of work-life balance. And what really changed it for me was understanding that that's a false analogy, right? Because there's no such thing as work-life balance, because one is a subset of the other. They're not equal. And it's really about deciding what kind of life you would like to have and what role everything under that plays, including work. And as long as we put them next to each other, we create this false analogy for founders, thinking that like, oh, work is just as important as life, and I'm like, no, that's complete bullshit, because one is an absolute subset of the other. And this is a very long arc, right? This is about the long game. And that's something that way too few founders are told, right? When you're starting a company, like your whole being is about that company. And too few people, certainly too few investors, sit them down and say, listen, you need to understand something. The odds are this is not the last company you're going to do, either for good or bad reasons. Your job is to actually create a long arc here, figure out what you want your life to be, and run it from that perspective. And I think we're so pounded every day, both by the media, by VCs, by everyone, as founders, around this work-life balance, and it's the hustle culture and the work. And look, there's a reason I don't live and work in the Valley, and I live and work in Boulder, Colorado, because I truly believe that this is about life and not just work. And so I apologize for hogging the mic. It's just a very passionate point for me. So anyone else want to jump in on that topic?
No, I love that you took us there, because I think so many, especially if we're talking about that first-time founder, potentially even the unfunded first-time founder who's like trying to get their grounding, the perception is you have to go all in and work 7 days a week. And it's not even hustle culture. It's just like work all the time until you have something you can grab onto, right? And when that is your perception, work-life balance is not even like even that false dichotomy is not a possibility. And I'm 100% with you that work is a subset of your life. I talk about your portfolio life. What does your portfolio look like? Your work, your family, your friends, your personal time, your hobbies, your personal health, whatever those things are. What is that portfolio that makes sense? The allocations make sense for this season of your life. And maybe if you're starting out a new company, it's going to be really heavily weighted toward work, for sure. Yep. But it's a balance that you're choosing for this season, and you have an expectation of when you're going to be rebalancing that mix. This is not the mindset that you're going to be forever. And so really thinking about, do I have the resources I need? As a first-time founder, I paid myself too little. Me and my co-founder, we paid ourselves pennies and then tried to build a company in New York City. And I was more worried on the daily basis about literally how I was going to afford dinner that night, that I didn't have the space to deal with like one more thing coming out of the blue, put me in a tailspin, right? I didn't have the resilience to be able to handle the uncertainty there. And the difference was like $20,000, right? Was not going to make or break our company. But
I know many companies where that is the make or break, but I totally understand what you're saying, and I completely support it. Yeah.
What are the basic resources you need? Income.
Yes.
Like a partner, whether that's if you don't have a business partner, you don't have a romantic partner, do you have someone else that you can go to be that person where you can just be absolutely vulnerable and honest about everything that's going on? You don't have to spin anything, and they can help you kind of reset or put things into perspective. And totally, you know, when you're starting out, and especially if you don't have those investors yet, then you need to have that circle of other founders, right? The
very powerful
that you can chat with, and ideally like one or two of them are not all first-time unfunded founders, right? You want like a couple of folks that are a little bit ahead of you in this game that you can get that perspective of, especially if you don't have that relationship with investors yet.
Yeah, I completely agree with Christina. I think one of the things that we double and triple click on at Precursor is peer-to-peer support. And more often than not, it's way more valuable than anything that we can share with you as an investors, because, you know, we're not always in the trenches at that same point in time. And we don't always feel your pain. We're excited to celebrate the ups. When it's down, to have someone walk you through how to process through that, whether that's your fundraising process or maybe losing your co-founder or anything else in between. So where possible, I think it's important for investors to either create that space, whether that's a founder-led, and that's something as simple as opening up, creating a Slack where founders can engage and it be a private Slack, or offering and sharing other platforms and programs for founders to get tapped into. Like one of the things we have kicked off earlier this year is leveraging one of the portcos that we have invested in that offers a leadership and executive coaching platform. And that's been great.
Awesome.
And it's a nice way, one, to signal that we support you, but it is also a nice way to also say, hey, you can leverage that resource when you're ready. So completely agree.
One of the things that I do on my team as we connect with founders is ensure that 1 in 4 events that we do is all about mental wellness. So we do fundraise faster on Twitter Spaces, pitch practice on Zoom, you know, how to build your investor pipeline. And then the 4th one has to just be something like how to switch off, how to manage your mental health, what are some of your hobbies. And we practice what we preach. And so I'm super proud of that we do that. And it just makes it not just founders do this, but here's what we do. Like I tweet all the time, but on the weekends, I switch off my replies. This just makes sure that I don't get glued to seeing the replies. Like no one's ever said anything to it. I've been doing it for a while, and I'm like, wow, this is cool. And so, you know, 6 p.m. I ramp down on Sundays, no tech, no TV, definitely no emails. I just meditate or paint or read. And it works for me. I'm going to say something slightly controversial though, which is I think it's okay if people want to work 7 days a week. Like I think hustle and 7 days a week gets a bad rap. I think it's very, very much a blanket statement of don't do this. If you say don't do this, and you're basically saying do everything like I do it, which is what you don't want to do. You can't say don't work Sundays. What if you just want to work 4 hours every day? You can work Sundays. And so my point is, all you have to do is figure out how to not burn out and figure out the things that work for you. But that's different for everyone. And so mental health, and like I said, again, it's something that people are just always kind of saying, here are the things that you shouldn't be doing, but it doesn't take into perspective of figure out what really works for you.
I think that's really the key.
Ask us if you want. That's okay. You know?
Yeah, I think figuring out what works for you is really the key to that statement, Saba, because I think we are often conditioned as founders that we need to be like X, right? If we want to be successful, this is what we need to do. And this is how this person did it. So that's what we have to do. And we have to function that way. And I think one of the real awareness processes that I went through is, it was a very humbling experience. I spent the day sitting next to someone who I respected a lot in the industry at a conference. And I watched that person process information and get like 10 times as much work done as I ever could. And I went home after that conference. I told my wife that I had to quit. I had to quit because I wasn't good enough. There's no way I could be successful because I couldn't be like him. And it took me such a process to go through to realize, like, that's okay. I don't need to be like him. I just need to be the best me that I can be. And I need to figure out what works for me. And how do I make that maximize my potential as a human, not just in business, but, you know, getting through everything to actually be productive and feel good about myself and have a little better, because I was in a really bad place from a mental fitness perspective after leaving that conference. Right. And it took a long time for me to come back and realize, like, no, I don't have to be like that. I just need to be like me. And if I can just be a little better me every day, I'm actually making really good progress. And that was a real tough learning for me, because we're so pressured, like, you know, hustle's good, hustle's bad. This is how it works. This is not how it works. Right. And we're all different, and we have different lives, and we have different families, and we have different needs. Right. And we need different environments. And I'm sorry, I'm rambling a little, just because I get angry when I see people feel like they have to be a certain way. So I don't know, I'll pause there. Anyone else want to add anything on that theme? Because I think it's an important one.
Yeah, I think it's just the danger of borrowing a playbook that doesn't apply to you.
Right.
And we see this in startups all the time. We're like, oh, we're going to use this that startup does. And you're like, but that's a different business model, or it's in a different industry, or there are 50 other reasons why this doesn't work for you. Like, you can't just use it because that company IPO'd and they did that. It was a different time. It was 5-6 years ago, a completely different context, a world away from now. And I think it's the same thing for people, right? You see these ridiculous articles. It's like 4 things that successful people do. And it's like, and you're like, okay, but if you're a night owl, then that's never going to work for you. So, so
and I think that's true even. I think that's true even within an organization, not just as a whole organization, right? And one of the big struggles that I went through, and by the way, guys, feel free to shut me up if I'm rambling too much, but one of the big struggles I went through as a CEO in one of my companies was realizing that everybody didn't have to work the same way, right? And I was like, hey, as a startup, everyone needs to be at a certain time. We're at a, you know, that's when we actually had offices, right? People should work together. But like, you know, it took a lot of evolution for me to realize, like, oh my God, everybody in my company is different. They have different needs. They're different skill sets. They come from different places. They look differently. They love differently. Like, they need different ways to work to actually be productive. And that's really hard as a CEO when you're feeling all the pressure from investors and from everybody else. Like, no, like, we have to, like, this is how we work. But it was an incredibly freeing emotion for me once I realized that the real way to build an amazing organization is to have diverse input and diverse people. And the challenge there is diverse people work differently, and they have different needs, and they need to be supported differently. So it's not just organization by organization, but even within the organization, I think having the leadership realization that people are different and people need different support systems and they work differently is a real big challenge, because we're so focused on this is how the company works and this is how it'll happen, and well, this playbook, and we're going to use, you know, anyway, I'll stop again because I'm rambling, but it's just.
And the more that the founders pay attention to their mental health and building a company from the beginning with that in mind, the more likely they are going to make this space for and make it clear that it is a value for the people that they hire. And I think this becomes a talent play in the long term.
100%. So I want to go back a little. And by the way, you know, anyone wants to go deeper on that, just cut me off and jump in. I'm totally fine with that. But I want to go back a little, because we were talking about, you know, work-life balance and perception versus reality, and how as humans we need to function. We are not our businesses. Right. And that's one of the big struggles from a mental fitness perspective, is equating our businesses with ourselves. And this binary outcome scenario, right, where if my business fails, I failed and I'm done. Right. And so I want to be a little transparent for a second and share an experience that, you know, really was difficult for me in the hopes that maybe it not only helps people listening, but maybe as a panel we can jump in here. So the first company that I actually founded, the second startup I was involved in, but the first company I founded, I was not the CEO, but I was a founder. We raised tons and tons of money, way more money than we probably should have. Everybody loved what we were doing. We couldn't execute. We ended up selling the business. So exit, check mark on the resume, right? But it was a shitty exit. And a lot of investors lost a lot of money on that company. And I was devastated. And I had moved from New York. I'd moved the whole company from New York to Boulder. And my family moved from New York to Boulder. And we had hired a bunch of people in Boulder. And the company, for all intents and purposes, failed. I mean, we sold it, acquisition, right? As far as everyone outside was concerned, we sold our company. It was fucking awesome. I was getting congratulations emails right and left, right? But the truth was, it was not a success. And I was convinced I was going to have to leave Boulder because I thought I was done. And I was in a very deep depression. And a week later, my lead investor called me and he said, so what are we going to do next? I was like, what are you talking about? I failed. He said, dude, companies fail all the time. He was like, I lost your money. He's like, if I couldn't afford to lose money, I wouldn't be a venture capitalist. This is how this works. You did the right things. You treated people the right way. You treated employees the right way. You treated investors the right way. You did everything you could. It didn't work. What are we going to do next? And that was a real awakening for me from a mental fitness perspective, because no one ever told me that it was okay if your company didn't succeed. So I'm going to pause there, see if you guys have thoughts or comments or suggestions that can kind of bring that home for a lot of the founders listening.
Naveed, I think you might be on mute.
Oh, yeah, thank you. After the thoughts on this question, let's jump into the Q&A. Thank you.
You got it. Thank you.
Yeah, there's some really good questions, and there's a really good discussion happening in the comments around recovery, which I love. Like, I think framing work-life balance as recovery, and kind of how much recovery do you need for optimal performance, and how to think of yourself as the athlete mindset. It's a great discussion. One of the questions I saw was around what's the best way to deal with the fundraising process as a first-time founder when it feels like all you can do is be glued to your phone, waiting for a yes or no response. How can you have a healthy mindset instead of nervously checking your phone? I love that question. Do you mind if you shoot that one, David?
Yeah, go right in. Everyone jump in. Love your thoughts.
So fundraising is one of the, like, when you talk about founder mental health specifically, it's clearly one of the most anxiety driving things, right? And by the way, VCs have to fundraise too, and so we also go through that, even though it might not be visible. But we the VC raising process is 4 times as long as it is for a company. But the things that sort of my experience has been around how to manage that anxiety and that stress is, one, and this may sound really trite, is just to run a good process, right? Like when you sometimes we can conflate working really, really hard as a way to ensure our success, and leaving the debate aside around like work-life balance or capacity and things like that. Just like there's sometimes working smart or understanding what you're working on and what excellence in process looks like around that area can help alleviate your mental health, because you're going in prepared and you're going in having a better understanding of the expectations from the process and what it could look like. So what that means, like first-time founder fundraising is, instead of just starting to sort of go down your Rolodex and hitting up people and asking them for money or asking them for introductions, go and read a little bit about fundraising, right? And Techstars and Saba have great resources in that, and a bunch of people in this group have a lot of really good resources in that. But from a real process, that means you have phases where you are working on your materials, have phases where you're building investor relationships ahead of the raise, have a phase, time box phase, where you try to pitch as many investors as possible in a boxed amount of time and let those investors know about your window of time. And then have a phase where you try to make a decision and you try to guide people towards a window of time. It's a really hard thing to do because until you've had someone raise their hand and say, hey, we're going to back you, it's kind of hard to feel like you can confidently say, hey, here's a deadline, right? Especially as a first-time founder, putting deadlines in front of VCs can feel intimidating. But if you do it softly and gently and with an understanding of sharing your reasoning behind it and sharing your reasoning of wanting to have a process, that can give everyone transparency and it can give you a set of expectations around what's going to happen. And then recognize, there will be a conversion rate, right? Like, different founders will tell you for different industries and different verticals, your funnel may have like a 5% conversion rate or a 20% conversion rate or a 1% conversion rate. It'll depend on what you're doing and how well it's going. But understanding what to expect from your conversion can help avoid that disappointment or like that need to constantly check your phone.
Danish, I'll add something that I think even going one step back for founders, just in the way that the question framed, how can you have a healthy mindset nervously checking your phone? To me, the mindset is, hey, this founder needs money because they're about to run out of it, as opposed to, I'm giving the investor the opportunity to invest in my company to turn that money into a lot more. Mm-hmm. And that's very different, right? So like already, it's not like, I'm not nervous about it. I'm excited about it. And so I think what you're talking about is what triggered me to realize it. It's to remind the founder that it's the opportunity you're giving them. Mm-hmm. If you're nervously checking your phone, you're going to be nervous no matter what. And so
I think that's a really good point.
You're fundraising to scale, not fundraising to not die.
Yes. Hopefully. That's not always the case, but the mindset is right. The mindset is 100% right. And way too many founders think that they're begging for money instead of giving people the opportunity to participate in their success moving forward. And I think that's a great. So another question here is, so to finish up that, another great resource that I always stress that founders should use when they're trying to either raise capital, understanding how to deal with VCs and manage their mental fitness, which also gets back to understanding the investor business, is make sure you read venture deals. Right? If you're a founder and you're raising capital and you're trying to do a startup and you have not read the book Venture Deals, you do not understand what you're doing in the venture world. And it's one of the best, easiest resources to look at. It also plays that. Does anyone else on the panel have any other good thoughts on specific resources to understand how the venture world works and to feel better about interacting on that level?
By the way, you have to read Venture Deals.
Yes.
Read it again.
Yes. And then bookmark it. Keep it with you. Yes.
And read it again. Like, I was about to pull it out, but the whole stack might fall. Like, it's not just something you read once. Like, it's on repeat. It's a playbook of things. Yeah, for sure.
I still constantly refer back to it. I'm a professional.
Jeffrey Busgang, an investor at Flybridge, wrote a fantastic book. I'm trying to remember what the title of it is, and it's not coming to mind. But
Mastering the VC Game. That's my favorite VC book. It's amazing.
It's brilliant. If you want to know what the motivation is for VCs and how they're thinking about their business, like as a first-time founder, it never occurred to me to understand what's on their mind, which seems obvious now. Having raised a second and a third time, I got a little better at that. But really understanding what they're thinking about really helped me have a better sense of where would I be the best fit. And I think this comes also back to the conversion rate. Don't spray and pray. Like, be really thoughtful about who you're going after and who's going to be the right fit, and do that research. And then it becomes, I think, a lot less of that manic energy of fundraising not to die, right? We can feel that energy. So that mindset shift, that research, that mentality, that completely reframes how you approach fundraising is going to have a material impact on how you show up to those conversations and the vibe you're giving off, as much as the actual work you're doing on the back end.
Just to
go ahead, Ayanna. I know you were trying to say something there. I want to make sure you get the time.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I was saying it's also super beneficial just to follow investors via Twitter or LinkedIn that you admire. At any point in time, they're writing about their process, what they're thinking about. And so you can get, real-time info beyond just the great resources that our peers just shared. But also, I think to kind of just put a pin in it, it really is owning your process. And owning the process piece is realizing that the VC business does not work without founders, right?
Yep.
So we need you as much as you need us. But you can also take this opportunity where you may not have the best engagement with investors to make that a mental note to also start to collect data. So should you get to a position where you are able to secure your first round of capital, the community is super small, right? The founder community, the VC community is super small. And what more often happens, than not, is your peers will ask you, how did you engage with that investor? And investors hate low NPS scores, period. And so in terms of you being discerning for now or later about how you're thinking about putting together a cap table and who you would potentially pitch, that's a data point. So it may not be a win right now for you, but that's a data point for you to think about when you're raising your next round as to whether or not you would want to engage with that investor. So you should feel empowered as founders throughout the entire process, even as you get a series of no's, because it really just takes one yes.
I totally agree. And I've seen way too many founders are scared to actually do diligence on investors, right? Because they just want the check and they just want to get it done, and they don't understand that it's absolutely their right to do real diligence on people that they're thinking of taking money from. And I always tell them, make sure you talk to other founders that have worked with that investor, and more importantly, make sure you've spoken to founders whose companies didn't succeed that worked with that investor, right?
Absolutely.
Because when everything's going well, everything's awesome. It's when stuff goes sideways you really learn what an investor is like. And if an investor doesn't give you those references, if you can help it, don't take their money. So I think that's really important that investors share that stuff. So getting back to the questions here. So there's a question. So tools or services that you guys recommend when you see that founders are struggling.
Yeah, I think for us, it's a combination of things. We're a big fan of leaning into the community because we have a very large founder community. And so where it's appropriate, we'll lean in and try to kind of galvanize the community around it.
Ayanna, she's always saying something awesome and then she disappears. That's not fair. Anyone else want to jump in and take up that question? Specific resources you recommend when you see founders struggling?
Isn't Pioneer Mine working on something? I don't know. I shared a video in the chat earlier.
And by the way, if you're just jumping on, Saba put a whole bunch of links in the chat for Techstars resources and other things that are super, super helpful. So please go make sure you get those. I know there's two that I would recommend. Aaron Houghton's got a great company called the Founder First System, which is specifically focused on founder mental health, and it's doing super well, and I know adding some really good results. There's also a group called Reboot, reboot.io. If you haven't checked it out, it's not super, there's some capital required there, but they create amazing boot camps and circles for founders that help them deal with mental fitness, and one of the best that I've ever seen. And Ayanna's back, so we're going to go back to Ayanna and let her finish what she was saying. You always jump out when you're saying something awesome.
I'm having like the worst technical day today. But I was saying, I think the pandemic has taught us more than that, like lean into community. So should you be fortunate enough to be a part of, a number of communities, whether that's within the investor, whether that's driven by the investor that's backing you or externally, lean into that. But just to add to suggestions, like Mental Happy is a great one, where it's not just based off of where you are as a founder, but it's based off of where you are in your life. Because you often need to separate the founder journey from the life journey. But also the brand. That's a personal plug for one of our portfolio companies, but I think they do a good job at creating these really intimate circles where it's connecting folks at the same title, but it's all about helping you become a better leader. So big fan of peer-to-peer support.
Awesome. So we've got 1 minute left. I hate to cut this short because literally I would talk about this for days. So in the last minute, one of the questions was, what's the best way for founders to reach out and find you guys, interact online, like Twitter, like what's your preferred method of contact? And we'll wrap it up there.
LinkedIn, email, just in case I get cut off again.
There you go. Twitter for me, DMs are always open. And my answer to the question of resource is the community around you. Find mentors, someone 2 years ahead, someone 20 years ahead, and someone a couple years behind. And those three relationships will help you keep on track. It's the best hack I've had to get to where I am today.
Christina.
I love that. Twitter for me, CM Walla.
Awesome. Danish.
LinkedIn and email, danish@greymattercapital.com.
Ayanna.
Sorry, Ayanna at precursorvc.com.
Awesome. And I am at DG Mandell on Twitter or LinkedIn. And thank you so much, everyone. This was an awesome conversation. And I hope we've helped a few good founders today.
Amazing. Thank you so much, David, Ayanna, Christina, Danish, and Saba for the wonderful panel discussion.